So when I was a senior in college, I was working at a local news station and I was a studio camera operator. And when I say that, it's important to note that my job was not out in the field. Like the guys that go out, chase all the crazy stuff, like that was not my job. My job was to operate a camera in the studio. It was a nice, clean environment. And but there were some downtimes between the shows. So we had a 6 o'clock show and a 10 o'clock show, and there was a big window of time between those shows. And there was one night I found myself upstairs in the offices where the reporters and the anchors were, and I was just outside of my boss's office, who was the chief photojournalist for the news station. And I'm sitting outside of his office as he's listening to the police scanner, and he hears something come over the radio that there's a man in a parking garage just a couple blocks away from where our news station was with a gun. So obviously that piques his interest. So a couple seconds later, he hears that there is blood dripping out of the truck in this garage. And so my boss gets up from his desk, he runs down the stairs, and for whatever reason, I decided to follow him down the stairs. And not only that, but I decided to follow him outside as he's making his way to his truck. And he turns around in this panic state and he looks at me and goes, "Are you coming with me or what?" And for whatever reason, I decided to follow him. And I got into his truck and he's driving down the road, again, just a couple blocks away. And as we're on our way, he reaches into the back and grabs a bulletproof vest and says, "Throw this on." So I'm on my way to this crazy scene. I've got a pregnant wife at home at the time. We're just barely married. And I texted her and said, "Hey, I don't know what's going on. Crazy situation at work, but no matter what happens, I just want you to know that I love you." And I'm in this panic state. And it wasn't until he handed me that bulletproof vest that I really, the weight of the situation hit me. The weight of the story that we were trying to capture hit me. And, it probably makes the story a lot less fun when I tell you the ending, which was that it was just a hunter who had a deer in the back of his truck and probably made some really unwise decisions in being in that parking garage at that time with his gun. But I say all that to say that as I was in that truck, I just realized the weight of that story as my boss handed me that bulletproof vest. But in actuality, that story did not really carry any eternal value. And so, as church storytellers, the stories that are around us, the stories that we tell, carry so much eternal value and play such a big role in getting the gospel out. And I just hope that as I talk tonight, that we understand the weight and the responsibility that we have as storytellers to tell stories. So tonight, the topic of our talk tonight is proactively finding the story. And this is something that really came about in the past year at Bell Shoals, the church that I work at. And so it's something that our church is still kind of working through. But the concept is that as church storytellers, it's naturally, I think a lot of times we focus on stories that have already happened. So maybe it's somebody who got a cancer diagnosis, prayed for a long time that they would be healed, miraculously was healed, and now they're living their life differently because of that situation that they went through. And these stories are great. We just filmed one at our church just a few weeks ago. But I also have discovered that there are stories that as church storytellers that we can kind of meet in the middle of the story. Maybe the story hasn't even finished yet. Maybe that story is still going on. And I'll give you an example of one. So this past February, our church had an event for our students that we call Movement Weekend. It's a discipleship weekend where the students come, there's teaching, there's worship. They also do a service project. And we did a promo video for Movement Weekend. And I started talking with the leaders in the student ministry and saying, "Hey, who are some students that were really impacted by Movement Weekend last year?" And they gave me some names. And the promo video was really revolved around the impact the Movement Weekend had had in the previous year on some students who had attended. And as Movement Weekend was coming up, I was talking with my boss and I said, why is it that we wait until the stories have already happened to tell those stories? And so I decided to text our student ministry leaders and I said, "Hey, who are some students that you're praying for this weekend? Who are some students that you're hopeful that God will work in a powerful way in their lives?" And they gave me some of those names. And so movement weekend came along. It was a Friday night and then Saturday all day and then Sunday morning were the days that they were running for that. And Friday night, one of the staff members came up to me and said, "Hey, there's a student here that is not saved. We've been praying for him for a long time. There's a ton of people at our church that have been praying for him. He that what the speaker is talking about right now is incredibly relatable for him, and we're hoping and praying that this weekend that he gets saved." And I don't, at that time, I didn't know what it was, but something hit me that just said, this is the story of the weekend. We knew we had to do a recap video for Sunday morning. And I just knew in that moment that Braden is his name. Braden was the story of Movement Weekend. And what ended up happening was our team kind of filmed throughout the weekend, kept our eye on Braden. I actually did an interview with him and some other students on that weekend. And then Saturday night, and we had no expectation that this was going to happen, but we were praying for it. Saturday night, Braden gave his life to Christ, and we captured that moment on video of Braden making his way forward and accepting Christ. And we really, it was like a 9-minute recap that we put together of Movement Weekend before Braden got saved. We got some interviews with Braden before that night even happened, and then captured the moment that Braden gave his life to Christ. And that story really opened my mind to that concept that I've been talking about of just finding those stories in the middle of them before they've even happened. And really, to me, I think there were four key relationships that made that story possible. And as we talk tonight, that's the biggest thing that I want you guys to get from this is that as storytellers, the key to being a good storyteller is building relationships. And to me, there's four key relationships that you have to have in order to tell stories, in order to find stories, in order to find those stories that you may not know about that are going on around you. And that first relationship that I would tell you is obviously it's a relationship with the Lord. You got to have a good relationship with the Lord. Are you praying over the stories that are around you? Are you praying for God to open your eyes to the stories that are around you? I recognize it now. I should have recognized it in that moment, but I didn't. But I recognize it now that when I say I knew that Braden was a story, that was the Holy Spirit that was talking to me and speaking to me and guiding me to Braden to focus on Braden. Are you, when you're in the middle of editing a video, when you're in the middle of filming with a person, are you actively praying about that story that God would open your eyes to what it is that he wants to speak through that video? So that's that first key relationship. How's your relationship with the Lord? Are you involving him in your process of storytelling actively? That second relationship to me is relationships with staff. We have a very large staff at Bell Shoals. We have a very large campus, but I still make it a point to walk across the campus, go down the hall, and just talk with people. Hey, what's going on in your ministry world? What's going on in your life? Meet anybody interesting lately? I had a situation where I'm honestly not a very social person. I'm very introverted, to be truthful with you. But because I've built up some really good relationships with our staff, there's been some great stories that have come about. In fact, it was just a few months ago. I was walking down the hall and just happened to bump into one of our worship leaders and got talking to her about somebody at her campus. And she said, "Yeah, so actually, that girl, she's a high school girl, she's in a wheelchair. She's going in for surgery in a few weeks to hopefully be able to walk. And she's been praying for a long time that she would be able to walk." Well, naturally, the storyteller in me is like, we have to sit her down and talk with her and get an interview with her. We need to tell her story. And so that was really interesting to intersect with her story at a point where it wasn't that she had already been healed. In fact, like she's not had the surgery yet and ended up getting postponed, but we ended up sitting down and interviewing her in the middle of her story. She's in this position where she's in a wheelchair. She's praying that she's going to be healed. We don't know yet what the result is going to be. But we believe at Bell Shoals that there's value in her story, even where she's at, even before what we're hoping to be a great result in healing for her ultimately. But that interview came about, that story came about from building a relationship with our staff and really making it known of what it is as storytellers that we're trying to do, which is to tell more stories. So the more that you tell these kinds of stories, the more your staff is going to have an understanding of the kinds of stories that you're looking for. But it's really key to build good relationships with your fellow staff members, because they're involved with so many different people in so many different ministry areas that you may never know. And so it's really important to have those people just involved in your process, asking them what's going on in their different ministry areas. You know, I believe that a third key relationship is relationships with people who attend your church. So, first relationship is with the Lord. Second one, are you building good relationships with the staff? And then the third is, are you building good relationships with people who attend your church? There's sometimes that on Sundays, I'll just watch. I'll take a Sunday and I'll just watch people, see their interactions, see what's going on. In fact, we had a Sunday recently. This is more on the staff side, but we had a Sunday recently where I noticed that one of our staff members was greeting people, and she got really, really excited to see somebody. Like, she was surprised, didn't expect to see this person there, and I thought it was really interesting. It was out of the ordinary. And I went up to her afterwards and I said, "Hey, who was that you were just talking to?" And she told me, and I said, "Oh, that's so interesting." Started asking some questions, and she said, "Oh, do you know her?" I said, "No, just curious." But I'm trying to do a better job as the lead filmmaker at our church, as a storyteller, to make it known to people that, hey, I might ask questions. I might be a little weird. I might be a little nosy. Don't be afraid to be weird. Don't be afraid to ask questions. But build key relationships with your staff and also with people who attend your church. We have a 94-year-old lady at our church that just recently went on a missions trip. And our team approached her before she went on the trip and we said, "Hey, we would like to tell your story." And she said, "Nah, I don't think so. I don't want this to be about me. I don't want people looking at me. It's all about God. Glory to God. I don't really want to sit on camera and tell my story." So I ended up, for my job, going on that mission trip with her and the other people who were there, and really just was intentional in building a relationship with her. Not because I just want to tell her story, but because I actually care about Anne. And that's really key. When you approach these relationships, you have to make it clear that you genuinely care about these people. And you should, as storytellers, we should, because God cares about them, God loves them, therefore we should care about them and love them too. And so while we were there in New York City on this missions trip, I just spent a lot of time with Anne and just asking her questions, getting to know her, getting to know her story, and got to hear what she was passionate about. And by the end of the week, she was telling me, "Hey, I know that telling stories of mission trips is what's going to motivate people to go on mission trips. I believe that that's an important part of the process." And so at the end of the week, after I'd heard that from her, I said, "Hey, Anne, I know that you believe that stories are a key part to getting people to go on mission. And I know that you don't want to be highlighted. I know that you don't want the camera on you, but I truly believe that your story is going to be really important for our people to hear. And so our team would love to sit down with you and do an interview with you." And so Anne went from, when she first met our team, saying, "Hey, I don't want to be on camera," to, after I was able to build a relationship with her, she said, "You know what? Okay, I'd be okay with me on camera telling my story." And it's because of that relationship that I was able to build, where Anne trusts me. She knows that I care about her genuinely. She knows that I love her. She knows that God loves her, and therefore I love her and I care about her. And so you building relationships with your people is a great way to continue to find stories. And the actuality is, all of these stories that we talk about are never truly finished. God is always working in people's lives. So no matter what point you intersect with their story, in a way, you're still intersecting with the middle of it, because God's not done with them yet. And so that really, I think one of the key things as you're meeting people, as you're building these relationships, is to talk. If you have a creative team, talk with them, make them aware of the stories that you're finding. Something we've just barely started doing at Bell Shoals is actually keeping a story library or a log of stories. Um, there are some stories that we filmed that didn't play for a year and a half. In fact, there was a story we filmed with one of our worship leaders. We knew it was a really powerful story. It was a time sensitive thing to be able to film it, and had no idea how we were going to use this video. And we talked for several months about, oh, well, what if we used it for Mother's Day, or what if we used it for this? And it never just really quite fit until about a year and a half later, there was a perfect opportunity to be able to use that story. And so, what I hope will be helpful, again, we've just barely started doing this, but keeping a story log. We have a spreadsheet now of names, a brief summary of what their story is, and potential areas where it may fit in our services. Like, this might work for a Mother's Day video, this might work for a Christmas story, or if we do a series on worship, this story might work for that. But it's helpful to be able to have those stories and to know just what stories are out there and how they might best connect with your congregation. That fourth relationship, for me, we talked about, the relationship with the Lord, relationships with staff, relationships with people who attend your church. The fourth relationship, and maybe one of the more important ones, is that relationship with your family. So for me, I find that if my relationship with my family, if things are not well in my house, that I suffer as a storyteller. I suffer at my job. Things are a lot harder. And so one of the things that I love about working at Bell Shoals is that I know that my leadership wants me to have this priority, that my relationship with God is first, my relationship with my family is second, and then that relationship with my job and the work that I do comes after that. And so I know that as a dad, as much as I love storytelling, as much as I love my job, I've got to make that relationship with my family a priority. And so I just want to encourage you guys with that. I know sometimes it's very easy to get caught up in the work that we do and to neglect our family, but that relationship has to come above our job. In fact, this is not why I prioritize that relationship. But one of the great things about focusing on a healthy relationship with my wife is that she's one of my best supporters. She's a great support system for me when things are difficult at work, when it's been a really long week. She's just an incredible support system for me. And again, that's not why I focus on that relationship, but that is one of the many blessings of having that support system. So if you have a family that you're with, definitely make that relationship a priority. And I believe that that's going to refuel you and re-energize you, that God will use those relationships to help equip you for being a better storyteller. And so really what all this comes down to is, are you actively listening for stories? Are you building relationships, and are you listening for these stories? Are you keeping your eyes out? You are the best advocate for these stories at your church. There's lots of people on my staff. Again, we have a large staff that don't fully understand what I do. Some people think I've been referred to as the AV guy. Some people say, oh, well, you're going to take pictures of this thing over here. Like, they don't fully understand what I do. And so because of that, there are very few people that will think to tell you stories that they hear. It's not on the top of their mind. When they hear a great story, they're not thinking, oh, I need to go tell the creative guy. And so you have to be the biggest advocate for these stories, because ultimately everyone has a story. Everyone has a story. And, I even interviewed somebody just this morning who was saying, I really felt like my testimony was insignificant. She had grown up in the church, felt like she had a very vanilla testimony, if you will, just grew up in the church, Christian family. And she ended up going on a missions trip. And her story, her unique story, connected with somebody who was a pastor's kid. And she was able to have a conversation with him that ultimately led to him praying to receive Christ. And so everyone's story matters. And that's why we, as creative and church storytellers, should advocate for these stories, because really what these stories are is a tangible way for people to hear the gospel and to connect with it in a tangible way. And so that's what I want to encourage you guys with tonight, is just that you have been given a gift to tell stories. Um, Build those relationships, focus on your relationship with the Lord, focus on your relationship with your staff, with the people who attend your church, and with your family, and continue to fight and advocate for these stories, because these stories matter to God, and therefore they should matter to us. So what are you doing to fight for those stories and to make them known so that more people can connect with the gospel?